Hello and welcome to today's On Location broadcast. We are filming at PCMA Convening Leaders here in Nashville, Tennessee, the great venue we're using. I totally recommend it. I love it to death. The Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum. So thanks to those guys for giving us the venue. Like I said, check it out. And our program today is Assuming the Risk, Event Security. Such an important topic now. You've seen it in the news. I think there's widespread agreement that the meetings and events industry is just not as prepared as it should. And I think we all owe it to ourselves and our attendees to really make sure we know the issues here. Joining us is a panel of experts in different disciplines. We have Brenda Rivers, Eric Rosenberg, and Mark Herrera. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to let them introduce themselves and what they do, and then we'll kind of get on with a roundtable discussion, and I'll kick it off with Brenda.
Great. Thank you so much, Tyler. I appreciate being asked to participate on this panel today. I have had a 20-year meeting and event company. We specialize in large and small events and incentives all over the world. In that time period, we have helped clients handle all types of crises that include hurricanes, ice storms, hecklers, bomb threats, unfortunately a homicide, and even a horse running wild. After that experience and actually going through the event that was hit by Hurricane Sandy in 2012, we set up a consulting practice to focus on helping companies develop a risk management strategy for their meetings and events that takes care of the duty of care that is owed by meeting planners to keep their attendees safe. And so this is really what we focus on for clients for whom we don't necessarily do their end-to-end meeting planning, but we go in as a consultant.
And you're presenting here at PCMA
I am,
coming up,
yes.
and what are you going to be talking about today?
Well, after the 10 years of experience that we've had, I developed a 360-degree process for corporations to implement that is replicable for all types of events. It is much more than just a checklist, and it is a process that is relatively easy to use and practical for their meeting planners, and that's what I'm going to present on today.
And I think you graciously made a white paper available for us also. So
I do.
You can go to our webinar page on the On Location section, and that information should be there. So look for that. And let's get it started with a question. Well, everyone reads the headlines and the horrible human tragedies that have happened. But in a legal sense, how can an organization or a planner or people be held legally liable for this?
Well, that's a very good question, and that's something that is very important to me and the process that I've set forth. Meeting planners have a legal liability to protect the safety and security of their attendees. There exists a special relationship between the meeting planner, the meeting organizer, and the client and all the attendees. And that relationship, coupled with the foreseeability of harm, which in today's world, multitudes of crises are considered to be foreseeable. The meeting planner has 4 duties, and those duties are very specific. And so they cannot really be sued or held liable for what an active shooter might create, but they can be sued or liable for the failure to fulfill their duty of care. So if they don't do all of the required activities to protect that attendee, as we saw in the litigation that's been filed in the Las Vegas shooting, that meeting organizer and meeting planner was actually alleged to have failed in their duty of care to keep the exits safe, to train their meeting staff on evacuation and crowd control. And we'll see how that turns out, but I believe that this is going to change dramatically the amount of litigation that we see coming out against meeting planners and meeting organizers.
And this could mean, much more even than an active shooter situation, but hurricanes, the ice volcano in
Right,
Iceland.
exactly.
How does all that enter into the picture?
Well, an act of God, you can't predict, you can't prevent an act of God. But again, if you have a very well-crafted crisis response plan with mitigation techniques, this means advanced preparation. This doesn't mean you just have a checklist that you fill out and stick in your notebook and hope that nothing happens. You really have to start in the due diligence process. When you select the location, you select the hotel, the venue, the security teams, the meeting planner has a duty to know of the risks that could be associated with that specific event and that location. And they have a duty to inform the meeting organizer. They have a duty also to warn the attendees. There are certain things that attendees need to know about so they can handle their own safety, such as the evacuation routes, such as emergency contacts, how to get to security, how to get to medical attention. So whether it's a man-made disaster or it is something like Zika or it's a bomb threat, you still have the same duty to prepare in the way a professional, reasonable, and prudent meeting professional would. So that's the standard.
And I can imagine there also are conferences or events that maybe have controversial subjects that are hot and button issues for people. So that's another thing.
Absolutely. The first thing that we recommend after you've done an assessment on how prepared you really are, the first thing you have to do for each program is conduct a vulnerability study. And it's a written study based upon about 15 factors. And the factors include, do you have controversial subject matter? Do you have speakers that, could be controversial? Do you have entertainers that, that people might want to storm and come in to see? What are all of the factors of things that could go wrong? And so, oftentimes there is no bomb threat. Oftentimes the medical emergency is handled, but it's how it's handled, and it's the damage that comes afterwards, and it's also when the meeting has to be interrupted and it has to be stopped. There's damages associated with that.
And boy, it sounds like a daunting topic to take care of. What's your recommendation for how does someone just starts on this process?
Well, I think the fact that it's overwhelming, there's so many foreseeable crises out there now. We have sexual harassment issues now that we have to worry about if that happens in one of our events. We have always been dealing with the fact that an active shooter can come into a conference venue at any time. There's soft targets. We need to do active shooter training, that type of thing. But the bottom line is you have to start early with advanced preparation, and you have to take a mitigation approach rather than a reactive approach.
And you, before we set this up, you said there's 5 essential elements of a company's meeting and event risk management playbook they should include. What are those?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because this is really the essence of the 360 process that we have developed, that we implement for or we train meeting planners on. The first element is you must assess your real state of preparedness. Most companies think they're prepared, and yet you ask them, okay, if you're prepared to handle an active shooter, show me your written plan. Show me that you know where security is going to help and what your team needs to do if there's a shooter or a threat of a shooter. So once you do an assessment, then you have to do the vulnerability study, and that gives you an idea of what crises need to go in your response plan. The third phase is to actually create the crisis response plan. This is nothing that can be off the shelf, but you have the protocol for all of your resources. And your first line of resource would be the hotel security or the convention center security or your own hired security. EMTs, if you've hired your own EMT. The DMCs often have crisis response plans, so you need to have a knowledge of all of those people that will be the first responders. And then you need to train your team, because the meeting team is usually the first reactor. So in this crisis response plan, they will know exactly what to do. I like to say, and in my training, I have it's called the 10-minute crisis test. So if your team cannot pass the 10-minute crisis test, meaning if they don't know what to do in the first 10 minutes of any type of crisis, then they're not prepared. The fourth stage of this is developing a communication strategy. I can't tell you how many meeting managers tell me that they have no written communication strategy on how to stay in touch with the attendees in the middle of a crisis, how to reach the attendees, how to stay in touch with the attendees, especially those that have, ADR issues, much less how to handle a social media blow-up, which can damage the organization's reputation terribly and cost a lot of money. And the last stage is, of course, a plan to recover and a plan to evaluate at the end. You need a recovery plan. Is the meeting going to stop totally, or will you be able to continue the meeting?
And who is a great first line of contact? I mean, should you, I would assume obviously the venue, but can the CVB in the destination get you in touch to the police agencies and emergency responders?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and this begins in that early stage of the duty to investigate and the duty to inquire. When you are helping the client or your company source the location and source the hotel and the venue, that's the time when you engage all of your resources, the tourism board, the CVB, the security for the hotel, the security for the convention center, the DMC's crisis plan. You want to get all of those plans and create essentially a playbook about what they're trained to do. And not only that, you need to make sure that they're updated. I've had a few situations where the hotel security, they have a book and it's dated 2015. And when you start to ask them questions, about their staff, you realize that they have, untrained staff. They have a lot of independent contractors. You have a duty to investigate the quality of the security team that you're working with. If you breach that duty and there's damages, you could be liable for that.
And then before we turn it over to Eric, and maybe he can chime in on this also, just on a site inspection, is there things planners should look out for when they're in a venue?
Is that me or that's me?
Either one.
I was going to say no, absolutely. That's that's the second part. Is we have, and we train our meeting managers. You have an entire security section when you do a site inspection. Long gone are the days when you go on a site inspection and it's all about the tastings and the entertainment and the activities. You get to go on the activities and you get to do the tastings. No, that's gone. You need to have at least a day set aside where you have a checklist, a security checklist that's updated, and you actually do a walkthrough. Look at their evacuation plan. Talk to them about crowd control. Who in the hotel knows how to evacuate? Where do people go? So the site inspection is very, very critical. And talking about legal liability, every step of this six-stage process needs to have careful documentation, because if you do happen to get involved in a lawsuit, you have to have every step documented. That's the first thing the court will ask you is, so you conducted a vulnerability study? Yes, I did. So, what did it show, and do you have a copy of it? Oh, well, it was just my instinct. And we knew that an earthquake wouldn't really be hitting in Washington, D.C., so we didn't have to put earthquake planning in our crisis response plan. Everything has to be documented, and this needs to be taken very seriously from the beginning.
Well, excellent. Thank you for that perspective. And let's move on to Eric Rosenberg. We brought him aboard because you really have a long history of planning international meetings, and maybe first you can introduce yourself, and
Sure.
then we'll ask some questions to you about what they're doing in other places that maybe are even probably ahead of the U.S. Because they've been dealing with these problems for longer.
So I, as you said, I've been planning meetings for the last 20 years, all over the world, over 70 countries.
And who is your company, and who are you?
My company now is Even Business Formula. So after 20 years, I decided I stopped planning meetings, and I'm helping independent planners to manage and grow their business. And I also wrote a book last year called Meeting at Sea Level, C, the letter C, where it's basically explaining all the methodology to align a face-to-face meeting with the organization strategy, and full of real example, including the one you were mentioning, Eyjafjallajökull, the volcano in Iceland.
Yes.
I got 5 meetings the next week, so what you do in that case, we save lives in another meeting, threats with specific meetings in Budapest with a US company, so all those events happen. And to your point, Brenda, as all the preparation, meeting planners are asked to you know the person who's playing 10 instruments at the same time, that's the meeting planner.
Yeah.
And yes, there's the liability, but then the same way you would for AV, or you would for crowd control, or you would for registration, I always work with a partner which is specialized in security. And that will be on site when we're planning important meetings that need security, less on incentive travel side, although there's still some issues there, but more on site. You want to bring a specialist that you trust, that you've worked with, same way you would bring an AV company for that specific field. And so that's what we did. Stories, I think we should all get all our war stories together, excuse me, and share that. But it is not happening somewhere else.
Yeah.
It is not happening to you. And as we know, the more you plan, the better you'll be able to react. And in this days and age, it can be happening anywhere.
Yeah.
To your point, in Europe, yes, the accent is from Belgium, although I'm in the US now since 2013. But in Europe, especially in the 70s and the 80s, you had the Bader-Bahnhof in Germany, you had the Action Directe in France, you had the Brigata Rosso in Italy, you had the CCC in Belgium, obviously the IRA in Ireland, all those events happen.
Yeah.
And you would think that people are more prepared and more aware, and I would say that the awareness in general is there, but the reality, and I've witnessed it the last years, something's happening in Paris, we're lighting candles, I am Paris, I'm so sad, something happening in Brussels, I'm lighting candles in Brussels, and then I forget about it. And it's mind-boggling to me how people can forget and can quickly forget.
Sure.
And I'm not saying that you have to live in a constant fear. I do believe you just have to realize and have a mind, a paradigm shift. This can be happening. We're sharing a story earlier on. I'm at an airport here in the US. I'm waiting to check in and I see an unattended luggage. So very loud, I said, is this luggage belonging to somebody? Nobody react, except one person looked at me and he said, it's probably nothing. I said, yep, probably.
Yeah.
And then I see one of the person from the TSA, and I know there's great people at the TSA, but this one in particular called the person. I said, there's an unattended luggage. You know what the person did? Just stood in front and called a colleague, and I suddenly felt much more secure.
Right.
We have to be aware of what can happen and be prepared to that. That doesn't mean, again, living in a constant fear. No, just knowing that there are some people out there that are not sharing life as we do, and that can happen. We have too many examples in the last years for not being aware of what our surrounding is.
And what are some of the things that they're doing internationally that you've noticed that you may see implemented here? I mean, I'm just thinking, is there more security, like metal security to walk through and things like that?
Depends where you go, but
Yeah.
obviously there is. If you go in Israel, you go into a shopping mall, you can just go through a metal detector.
Really?
And it's normal, and nobody is complaining about it. It depends obviously on the country you go, and there are metal detectors, but it's really first of all understanding what are the surrounding areas. So for a meeting planner, you need to work with local people, and I'm sure Mark will speak about that.
Yeah.
There are specialists all over the world, and you can find them through your DMC, through your convention and visitors bureau, the DMO. You need to ask for it and know the question to ask, and then really look with them. So what is the habits? What are the general threats? We had a big meetings in Hungary, and I was mentioning earlier on, with a US company at the time where there was a lot of demonstration against the US in particular, 6-7 years ago. And what happened was that we worked with local people, assessing the threat, what would happen if, and having the plan, just like Brenda explained. So locally, I would say that people in general have been working in that frame for a longer time,
Yeah.
that does not mean that they are totally up to date, that they know exactly what's going on. And if you don't ask the question, they might not think about it.
And they might not speak the same language as you too.
Definitely.
Yeah, so
Definitely.
is it really a necessity to have a translator in that situation, or?
Not only translator, but always re-asking the question. I'm going
Okay.
to give you a very simple example that has nothing to do with security, but to illustrate your point. We moved here, and I'm speaking with a landlord. We're renting an apartment. And she said, "Oh, do you want an apartment on the first floor or the second floor?" No, I want the ground floor because I have little kids. And she said, "Oh, so you want the first floor?" I said, No, I want the ground floor. And she said, "But your realtor said that you wanted the first floor." Then I said, "My realtor is wrong. I want the ground floor." And then it hit me. Ground floor in Europe is the ground floor, is your first floor here. So we were speaking about the same thing with different words. And until it hit me, then I said, "Oh, okay." So now you translate to a very important situation, which is the security part. So I found out that regardless of the language, first, always work with local people. Second, I'm re-asking the question and I'm restating what the people said to make sure that we are all on the same page and ask the question. So in that case, what happened? And just the last one, because I'm very passionate with cultural differences, but to your point, there was the story of a U.S. speaker in Japan, and he was told not to tell a joke, and he told a joke, and everybody laughed. And so he went to the translator afterwards and said, "I know I got carried away, but how did you translate that?" He said, "Sir, when we heard that you were telling a joke, we told everybody in the headphones, the speaker is telling a joke. When it's over, we'll let you know. Please
And you
laugh
laugh.
at that moment." But to your point, Tyler, it is so crucial to verify, not only in security, but definitely with security, that we all understand the same thing, that we all understand that what's going to happen in a specific situation.
And I know even just going, I was at IMAX America, and it was in Las Vegas, at one of the evening events, and they had metal detectors to go through. And it doesn't bother me. I understand the situation. And even I think going into like a concert, say, where a lot of young people go to, they're getting conditioned and used to going through metal detectors. And that's interesting to me.
Right.
Yeah, and showing a bag,
Yeah,
and opening the bag,
exactly.
and also getting into the habit that you don't need to go with a huge backpack to a concert.
Right.
It is, again, part of the new reality. Are you going to enjoy the show less? Absolutely
No.
not. But that's part of getting in, making sure you're secure and you're inside. And yes, that happened many times overseas. It did happen here. I'm afraid that we cannot say it's not going to happen again.
Right.
So it's better be prepared and just live in a different way and still enjoying life as it should.
And how do you think things are going to change in the future? What's your crystal ball say?
I'm convinced that we need a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
As I said earlier on, people tend to forget too quickly. So that I'm totally convinced we'll get used to it. We'll get used to going through metal detectors, shopping mall. I was in a shopping mall last week, and I see people coming in and out with basically no checking on anything, which I think that would change. And I have an example of a specific convention center that I won't name, but I was at a conference last year. And this conference center is basically in between two main streets in that city. And I was having a phone call on one side, and there was the coffee break. And then I see a guy walking in with a backpack. So I immediately switch off my conference call and start following the person. And he went to the people and keep walking and went out to the other side. And I realized that that person had nothing to do with the convention. That was just a shortcut in the street. That, I think, will not happen in the future.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and I'm sure Mark will speak about that, but unfortunately, people are not realizing that yet. And until, that's what is sometimes mind-boggling with human beings. Until something happened, people talk about it, but don't really prepare.
Yeah.
And then when something happened, they want everything ready by the night before.
Right.
And so that, I think, will also change in the future. And we will keep on meeting, and we'll keep on enjoying meeting each other, and enjoying concert and trade show as we need, because face-to-face meeting is, if you look at any business challenge, you need face-to-face to succeed.
Yeah.
It would just be in a different mindset.
And we'll all adjust, and
Yeah.
it's the new normal, I guess you could say.
Absolutely.
All right, let's turn it over to Mark Herrera now. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Thank you for having me, Tyler.
And you have quite an impressive, at least to me, background with experience with SWAT teams, Homeland Security. When it comes to security stuff, you're quite the expert. And why don't you tell everyone who you are and explain what you're doing now and some of that history?
Thank you, Tyler, very much. I truly appreciate it, and I'm honored to be here with such a great panel with obviously Brenda, who from the legal perspective really nailed it, and of course with Eric as well, who can hit from the international side. So I'm honored to just be a part of your panel.
Thank you.
My background is kind of it's different. It's a little unique. I did retire special operations, so I worked SWAT for about 15 out of my 20-year career. Retired, and then I went to the Department of Homeland Security. So there my job was to train armed personnel on how to regain control of hijacked aircraft. In the event it gets hijacked again post 9/11, it's not an option. So basically what I've done is, part of that training there was I taught mindset, situational awareness, forecasting hostile encounters, looking beyond the physical security measures, because that's what's critical and that's what's key in today's world. So I did that for several years, and then I was picked up by IAVM to oversee, obviously, as a director of education, to oversee the educational components to all of our.
Explain what IAVM is, the acronym.
International Association of Venue Managers.
Okay.
And so it's, as part of IAVM's functions, my job there was to oversee the Academy for Venue Safety and Security that focuses on 4 domains. So basically our training, our curriculum is tailored and structured for all those collaboratively that work within a venue, from your frontline staff all the way to your executive teams, and it focuses on risk management, emergency planning, operations, and training. And we have this academy every year. So as part of IAVM, I developed some life safety, live training programs, because I truly believe that the best way to inoculate people to certain conditions is to actually run them through what I call reality-based training. If I can run you through the motions and I can put you there, it's a lot easier to recall it and to reduce the amount of time it takes to respond to certain conditions and situations. So what I did was I took the mindset, which is exceptional focus, performance, and control in extreme situations, and I brought it to the ground level. So from the aircraft down to the ground. So I pretty much travel around the world, and I teach on a heightened level of situational awareness. And when people ask me, well, how is that so heightened? I said, well, programming the subconscious mind to show you things that you don't see on a regular basis based on your environment, and then I give you a plan of action so that you can execute it without putting a lot of thought into it. That's the key. I always tell people the best analogy I can give you, it's kind of like going to the doctor for a flu shot, right? You get a small dose of the disease, guess what? You become inoculated. Same thing. If I can put you in a situation, in a controlled environment, whether it's an active shooter situation, situational awareness, and heighten it, where I walk you through the motions, then you're more likely to recall it whenever you encounter that. Because I always say the things that affect us is, there's 2 things in this world as it pertains to safety and security, and that's hesitation and complacency. When we do the same things every single day and expect the same outcome, and all of a sudden an event presents itself, and you're caught on your heels, and you have no plan of action, no emergency protocols whatsoever. And now you become a victim, or you can't assist others. So I always say we got to take that hesitation out of our lives. So that's where the mindset comes in assisting to do that.
What can someone do, I mean, just from a wholly different perspective, if they're an attendee at a meeting or in some venue and something, God forbid, like an active shooter breaks out? What advice would you have immediately there to help mitigate the situation or protect themselves and others?
That's a great question, Tyler, and I think the most important thing is that that anyone that attends, for the longest time, we felt like there was always somebody dedicated to our safety and security, and that was the go-to person, and that was the person that was solely responsible for not only their safety but the safety of others. That's not the case in today's world. Everybody has stake in that game, and everybody is equally responsible. And somebody says, well, they're dedicated to that. And I said, yeah, but you may see something at an event. You may be that first person, that frontline staff or the attendee that sees something unusual, and you should be that first person to report it and say something. You see something, it's kind of like the DHS slogan. You see something, you say something. Don't hesitate. So part of that is we must train to spot and to increase and enhance our observational capabilities, be able to spot that anomalous behavior. The thing that really stands out in the crowd, that needs to be reported immediately. Don't hesitate, and find out who you're going to report that to before you even attend the event. So in other words, you have to do it. It's kind of like the threat. The threat basically does what we call pre-operational surveillance. You kind of have to do the same thing before you go to an event. And that's everyone that works within that venue as well. And it's now no longer concentrated to just the venue personnel. It's meeting planners, suppliers, organizers. It's everyone that is participating as part of that event. It's a collaboration.
And what would you say, what is the current threat level and how does it relate to the meetings industry?
Well, the world has changed since September 11th, obviously. We still remain, it's a nation that remains at risk to this day. And it's going to continue to remain at risk for the foreseeable future. Meetings, it's not going away. The thing about it is, what I see is that there have been some successes, there have been some failures. Because if you remember, 9/11 is where everything, as I mentioned, that's where everything began. That's where all the emergency protocols and procedures started becoming enhanced. People started doing their risk assessments and identifying what their vulnerabilities are. It wasn't as heavily concentrated on prior to that. The post 9/11, it was, and it came at a cost. So I always look at it, that was a gift for us to enhance our security posture. If you remember, 9/11, the World Trade Center, for the first time in U.S. history, the World Trade Center was hit at the garage level, and they didn't bring the building down.
Right.
And the news media had put it out there that had there been an explosive higher end, that could have potentially brought the building down. Well, no different than the threat today. The threat is taking notes, did back then, is doing it today. Well, what a better bomb or explosive than two fully fueled aircraft simultaneously slamming them into our monumental buildings, right? No one expected that. So that happens. Now, guess what? It has a ripple effect, because now our entire industry is started to identify what are those vulnerabilities. And the greatest story that I can say, the success, is that we have foiled over 45 attempts because of 9/11, because we've been able to go in there and enhance all of our emergency protocols and procedures. And that has made a difference, because people, to a point, were seeing something, they were saying something, but to Eric's point, we get very laxed. When something happens, time kind of heals, and we seem to forget. Or we have that mentality of infallibility. It's not going to happen to me because I'm really secure. I always call those famous last words.
Yeah.
Or the hopelessness. If it's
Right.
going to happen to me, if it's going to happen, there's nothing I can do about it. Well, vicariously, you are liable for not only your safety, but the safety of others as well. So don't ever go walk around and live in that bubble, that what I call condition white, oblivious to what's going on around you. Be in that condition yellow, where you're prepared to react to a perceived threat and have a plan of action in place. That's critical. The meeting security is at the top of everyone's mind right now. I mean, after the recent incident in Las Vegas, planners need to make sure that their venues, the suppliers, are prepared to handle any emergency that they encounter. Any emergency, because it's critical that we all come together to figure out ways to mitigate those risks.
And what are some best practices to include in your security plan?
I think one of the most important things is perform a risk assessment. Every venue should be performing risk assessments, and as a planner, there should always be security personnel as part of that risk assessment as you're developing that particular event. They should be a part of that meeting. Site evaluation is also very critical, and that's key. When I talk about site evaluation, do our meeting planners go in there with a complete checklist saying, these are the things that I see in and around the venue, that do you have the security measures in place to secure them? And that would be garages, that would be parking areas, that would be access control points. Are there going to be any queue times that need to be reduced? Are there high-speed areas that we need to focus on? And what's your guard force look like for that particular event type? Are we going to have enough to cover that particular event? So those are a couple things. I always believe that you should also ask for emergency evacuation plans. I think that's critical. I think that's key. Somebody says, well, you don't want to give away the playbook. Well, let me explain something. The threat already knows your playbook, right? During the pre-operational surveillance of the threat cycle, he or she knows has identified all of your vulnerabilities. And if you have your security measures in place, right, and the threat sees that, chances are you're going to move the threat, because the threat needs a path of least resistance so he or she can accomplish what he's going to accomplish. So with those security measures in place, hopefully they move elsewhere, or it just deters it completely.
Right.
Knowing the location of emergency exits, that's another best practice. How many of us pre-plan, when we go to an event, we identify where all of the emergency exits are, and do we have a contingency plan? Do we have our own personal plan on how we're going to evacuate? Where are we going to rally? Does the venue have those plans in place? And if so, are they sharing that information with your event planners and your organizers? That's critical.
And I was just going to add, one of the things when I first got into this industry, our blogger, Joan Eisenstadt, I'll have a shout out to her. One of the things she does at every one of her presentations, the first thing she does is point to the emergency exits. And I always say, that's one thing I've remembered my whole career, and I don't really see it. I don't see people
I think
doing
Brenda brought it up just a little bit ago, that, what we do is when we constantly emphasize certain security processes and procedures, is we're programming, as part of the mindset I train in this part of it, is programming the subconscious mind. And what we're doing is we're building on our experience files, and we're programming that part of the mind that we call the dumb part of the mind, but it's not. It's the irrational part of the mind that's always subject to recall. So what you're doing is you're re-emphasizing. So ultimately, you can recall it. And so when I say, well, here's your emergency exit, down the hall to the left, well, guess what? If something happens, that's been programmed in my subconscious mind that I recall it, and now I have a plan of action. So I always talk about training, the importance of it. Is that what you're doing? You're re-emphasizing exactly what the processes and procedures are so you can recall that information. So that's another one. Access plan for EMS and obviously your first responders is key. Right? You don't want to wait till you have a crisis or a situation to know what the access routes and what the rally points are going to be for your EMS and all your emergency responders. And of course, having a contingency plan in place for bomb threats and or power outages, because you have to know and understand that the element in the threat out there knows that the best way to really affect your facility or a venue, it doesn't matter where you're at, is to create some type of a power outage before they execute. So those are just a few things that I can share with you.
Yeah, and you mentioned training, and then earlier when we were communicating, you said training collaboratively. Why is that so important, and what are some of the current security initiatives out there?
Absolutely. As new threats emerge, the best thing that planners, venues, and obviously your suppliers can do is collaboratively work together to train. You have to be able to speak the same language, because the last thing you need is for someone to say, well, whose responsibility is this in an evacuation, and there's no plan of action. So I always believe, and even as a tactical commander, I always appreciated that call when they'd say, Sarge, can you come in and bring your tactical team and train in our venue? I loved it, because it did several things. First of all, it allowed my team to become very familiar with that particular venue, that if we ever had to respond, it would be automatic. We knew exactly where the entry and exit points were. We knew exactly how we were going to clear, secure that environment. So I really advocate that training is collaborative, and it's jointly done with your local, state, federal agencies, to include your fusion centers, to include your meetings teams, your meeting planners, your suppliers, your organizers. As I travel around and I do this training, I always advocate that when I do your training, I want everyone that's going to work within that venue to be at that particular training, because it's applicable to everyone. And everyone needs to know what their responsibilities are. So that's my take on training.
And maybe clarify with the International Association of Venue Managers, if there's any resources there people can go to. I think you kind of discussed it earlier, but I always like to reemphasize where the good resources are.
Sure, Ty. There's the resources are, we utilize our educational programming. We have, I sit on the Department of Homeland Security Council that oversees all of our public assemblies. So it's really awesome because I'm able to take information from that's current and it's timely, and I'm able to integrate that into our curriculum, whether it's the Academy for Venue Safety and Security or it's the education that goes into our annual conference and or our guest service conference, also known as Guest X. These happen every year. The Academy happens every year, so we're able to, and in fact this year, working so closely with IAEE and ESCA, we've really advocated that those folks become involved in that educational programming because they're going to be able to network and work closely in the curriculum of risk management, emergency planning, operations, and training. So it gives them an idea of how the venues work. So when they're organizing their specific events, they know the questions to ask, and they know how they can work jointly with these folks. So that's one resource. Obviously, we're working right now through the Exhibitions and Meetings Safety and Security Initiative, which is MC. In 2016, as you're probably aware, 3 associations came together, which was ESCA, IAEE, and IAVM. And they decided, it's time that we raise and increase our baseline capabilities, our security capabilities within convention centers. Because again, it's about protecting that $283 billion industry, and it's huge. And the thing about the threat today, the threat knows and understands that here are all the areas that pose vulnerability that I can go in there and affect small to large crowds. Well, we understand and know that there's certain areas that are very porous, and there's so many entry and exit points. There's so much queue time that the queue time is not where it needs to be in some places where you have large crowds beyond and outside those physical security, those access control points. So the threat knows it. So we thought, well, we came together. We thought, together we're going to build and develop our security guidelines, and we're going to take them to a different level, that we're going to utilize those guidelines, share them with the Department of Homeland Security, and IAVM is going to provide the in-house internal portal that houses the guidelines, and once they're approved by the Department of Homeland Security, those convention centers can come in and seek designation, where we would send a team out to do a complete assessment. So we're basically taking the legwork out for these folks to become Safety Act designated and ultimately certified. And again, there's that additional protected liability, and that's another question as an event planner that I would ask: are you Safety Act designated, or are you Safety Act certified? Because that tells me that you've taken the extra steps and measures to enhance your baseline capabilities, and that's where I would want to have my event.
Thank you for that. Great information. We could do another couple broadcasts just on everything you talked about. I go to a lot of these industry events, and a lot of times I don't see these things implemented even in our own industry. And I'm just wondering, you guys go to a lot of events. What are you seeing out there that should be changed, and how can meeting planners communicate, say, to their stakeholders the importance of this? What are some of the, what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, I mean, that's the 64,000 or whatever question. We have to be the leaders in setting the example for the corporate clients that are engaging us to fulfill their meetings and events. And so if we're not doing it in our own house, then we're not certainly doing what we should with our corporations. I think you have to go right back to, does the organization understand their duty of care, and have they included the duty of care requirements in their risk meeting management policy? And all of this sounds so overwhelming to meeting planners. They go, yes, you're right, but they go back and they go, I have 100 things to do to get this program off the ground, and I know I need to do something about this, but the first and best thing for them to do is sit down with their stakeholders. Have someone from legal, someone from HR, hopefully someone from finance in a meeting and say, we really need to look at our risk management policy for meetings. And does this include these 4 things that we talked about? Does it include a vulnerability study for each meeting? It has to be a separate vulnerability. The meetings are all different. Show me, do we do a vulnerability study, yes or no? Do we have a crisis response plan based on the risks that we've identified for this program in Puerto Rico? Here's a program in Puerto Rico. What are our risks? Did we do that study? Did we marshal our resources when we were on the site inspection? Did we meet with the security team? Did we meet with the DMC? You can ask those 4 or 5 questions in front of your decision makers, and when the answer is no, do we have the communication strategy? Show me the written communication strategy that we have integrated into our risk management plan.
Yeah.
If they're not there, that's where they start. That's where the meeting planner starts. And then the meeting planner raises their hand and says, I have a legal obligation. I'm in charge. When something goes wrong, people look to me. And so if we don't have these mitigation plans in our meeting design, we're all liable.
Yeah.
So help me out here. And that's how the meeting planner is the one that's going to affect change with those decision makers.
And I think to Brenda's point, Tyler, is we have siloed ourselves to limiting our focus to only our areas of responsibility. This is what I'm responsible for, and that's it.
Yeah.
There's someone else that's responsible for assuring the safety and security of everyone that's attending these events. But I think that there's certain questions, and there's certain questions that need to be asked by event planners. They need to be able to help mitigate and reduce the risk, and they need to ask, to Brenda's point, they need to ask those questions at the end of the day. You know, what type of training has the venue supplier staff received, and how recently? Has a threat and vulnerability assessment been completed? If so, when and how often? Who's responsible for crowd control, and how will it be implemented? How's it going to be implemented, and what's your crowd dynamic look like? And do you have the guard force equivalent to manage and handle that particular crowd? Is the Venue Safety Act certified, as we mentioned before, and how that adds to that protected liability? What type of access control measures are required, especially for high-end out traffic? Because we know now that the threat is looking beyond the physical security measures. They're affecting the crowds as they're coming into the venue now because of the queue times. So now they don't even have to come, they don't have to even go beyond the physical security measures. It's outside. So do we have those areas blocked off? These are questions that they can ask. Who's responsible for ensuring each piece of the plan is executed? Can they ask that question? Absolutely. And how often do you invite law enforcement and EMS, your local, state, federal, your fusion centers, to come in and actually take part in training within your facility? And when was the last time?
And at the end of the day, the whole thing, as you rightly said, Brenda, it's overwhelming for a meeting planner.
Sure.
Now, what I'm totally convinced of, the same way a meeting planner needs to know about AV production, needs to know about who we're going to feed those people, how we're going to transfer those people.
It's that foundational to their job.
It is part, security is today part of what they should be
That's
looking
right.
at, not only because of liability, because it's part of their job now.
Right.
Should they know everything? Should they know the run, hide, fight if there is an active shooter? Probably they should, and probably everybody should be aware of. But at the end of the day, I think a meeting planner has a lot of resources. You look at what IAVM is doing with MC is one thing. You look at what Brenda is doing in liability is another thing. And if you look at all the major associations today in our industry, they all are partnering with some kind of institution or organization to train people. So the information is there. Now it's first of all coming back to the essential, a paradigm shift in your mind. Where can I find the information? And who can I partner with for that specific part so that I'm securing my meeting and preparing accordingly.
And there was something, that's a good point. There was something else that was mentioned, that sometimes we encourage safety and security 24/7, and we should. And they say, well, that's going to build on paranoia. Well, there's a difference between paranoia and preparedness, right? Yeah. There's a difference between the two. If I'm prepared, I'm going to be less likely to be paranoid, and I'm going to have those plans of action. Yeah. One of the things is, I always talk, and you had mentioned it earlier, what does the individual do when he encounters something unusual? There's a thing called the OODA loop. It stands for observation, orientation, decision, and action. And it is the disruption of the decision-making process, right? And I can disrupt your loop by giving you a condition that you've never seen before. And if you don't have a plan of action, and you haven't orientated, if you haven't made a visual observation of a situation with at least 3 plans of action, it's going to be hard to react or respond to that. So as part of the training through IAVM, that's the one thing that we do, is we say we've got to look, we've got to help people increase and enhance their observational capabilities and look forecast the hostile encounters and look way beyond the physical security measures. Because as one of the venue managers asked me a while back, he says, how can I guarantee no risk? No one can guarantee zero risk. All we can do is provide the physical security measures, the tools, the resources, and the training, raise the baseline capabilities through MC, through this initiative that I had mentioned earlier, to reduce the levels of severity. So I'm thinking, we've got to now look beyond that and increase observational capabilities by giving folks the tools to react or respond, to spot the anomalous behavior before it ever even comes into the venue, to really target that third layer and that concentric ring of any venue. And who's responsible for doing that? Everyone that works within the venue. So your suppliers, your organizers, your meeting planners, your venue personnel, they all have a responsibility to do that.
Well, great. Thank you, Brenda, Eric, and Mike. What an amazing presentation. There's so much to think about, and I think the old Chinese saying goes, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step.
True. Sure.
And so you got to take that first step for any number of very important reasons. So thank you so much for all your information.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Nice
And
to meet
thank you
folks.
for joining us.
Yes.
Please stay tuned for Rita Harrell from the Myrtle Beach Convention Center.
Love to stay in touch.
She's got an
Yeah.
interesting little bit of information I'm sure you'll enjoy. And if you haven't had lunch yet, it might even make you hungry. Thank you. We're here at PCMA Convening Leaders with Rita Harrell with the Myrtle Beach Convention Center. Thank you for sponsoring this On Location broadcast today. We couldn't do it without you to bring all this great content free to the viewers here. You got something strange you got in your hands, and I'm just kind of wondering what's going on there.
Well, we're known, Myrtle Beach Convention Center is known as our BLT.
A BLT? Well, what's that mean? I know it's a sandwich, but it means something more than that?
Well, it is a sandwich, but look, our BLT is the business, leisure, and traveler market. So what we're doing is we're showing you that associations and groups can extend their stay from their meeting or convention, and they can experience our beaches as our lettuce, of course, many beautiful beaches, and all our tourism opportunities that they have to tour the area. We've got shopping, live theaters, wonderful things to experience, golf, of course, over 100 golf courses. So on the back end and the front end, you can come and you can have a leisure stay and enjoy Myrtle Beach. And we sandwich that all together, and it's known as our BLT. Please come and join us.
Well, you're making me hungry, Rita.
I know. Take a bite out of this.
Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you for sponsoring our On Location broadcast. Thank you for all the great presenters and all the great information they imparted. And thanks to all of you for viewing today.